Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today as we discuss the legislative changes to the dual credit scholarship program. My name is Becky Gilpatrick, and I am the Director of Student Aid at the Kentucky Higher Education Assistance Authority. I want to welcome you along with my colleague, Robin Iber, who is the Senior Fellow for K-12 Policies and Programs at the Kentucky Council on Post-Secondary Education. There's a few housekeeping things I want to touch on first. We are expecting a rather large crowd today for the presentation. So if you have questions, please type those over in the chat. And we have someone who is monitoring those. We will try to look at those. We don't know if we're going to have time to actually answer Q&A during the presentation at the end. But regardless of that, we will be looking at those. And we have a frequently asked questions document that we're putting together as part of this implementation, and we will use the questions today to help add to that frequently asked questions document. So we're also recording this presentation. So if we will have this link available after everything ends today, and it will be available on websites, and we will talk more about where to find those things as we get further into the actual presentation. So just to give a little context, as you might know, the Dual Credit Scholarship Program was created in 2016, not quite yet, Robin, and it significantly changed the landscape of education in Kentucky over this past decade as more and more of our students are actually enrolling in dual credit coursework. And we're seeing increasing numbers of those students actually earning associate degrees by the time they graduate from high school. So a little few statistics to kind of help this along. For the 24-25 year, there was actually 46% of Kentucky's high school graduates that had successfully completed at least one dual credit course. And that really sets Kentucky as a national leader when it comes to dual credit, because nationally, only 1/3 of students are actually able to achieve that milestone. From a scholarship perspective, though, KIA actually dispersed $26.5 million last year for the 24-25 year, and that was to over 47,800 students statewide. So that is huge, and this dual credit program continues to grow each year. And for this school year, we are expecting the expenditures for the scholarship program alone to increase to over $29 million. So with the implementation of this House Bill 193, we're now working to ensure that the state dollars are well invested and that our students are actually using their scholarship funds on the coursework that's most beneficial to them and to their post-secondary goals. So with that, we're going to take a closer look at what this bill actually does and does not change, and how this implementation will work moving forward. All right, so the House Bill 193 was passed last year during the legislative session, and it made several changes to the dual credit scholarship program. And so we have a bulleted list here of what those changes are. The first thing is it adds language that clarifies that the general education coursework is to be approved, and it needs to meet the criteria that's outlined in the statewide general education core. And we're going to talk more about what that means today. The other thing is it merges the Work Ready Dual Credit Scholarship Program into the Dual Credit Scholarship Program. So as you know from working with this for years, it has been a source of confusion and difficulty to talk about two different scholarships and how those things react with each other. So as we move toward the implementation, the conversation is going to change from not so much talking about the type of scholarship that is available to students, but talking about the type of coursework that the students are taking and whether that's general education or career and technical education. The other thing this bill does is it adjusts the priority award order from a grade level, 12, 11, 10, 9, to a first come, first serve by the application date. And when we talk about the application date, we're talking about the date that the students actually go into KIA's website and submit their preferences. And that's the point where they actually have the scholarship and that's committed. The bill also establishes that the tuition rate ceiling is to be rounded down. And sometimes we do have in the calculation like an odd dollar amount. It ends up making change when we do the math. And so this just tells us we're always going to round down on that to come to the lowest, the near even dollar so we can process in even dollars the whole time. And last but not least, it removes the requirement for the post-secondary institutions to return funds to KIA when the students either fail or withdraw from their course and it's unsuccessful. So if we look at this next slide actually shows that some of these things have actually been implemented without you really even realizing it, because it wasn't much of a change other than just an administrative change. So what we have done, the bottom three bullets are already in place. KIA has been awarding the scholarship money on a first come, first served basis all along, really since 2016, because the program has always been fully funded. And so we've never had to worry about that. The round down part on the tuition calculation, that was an easy change to make behind the scenes. As you know, KIA waits for the KCTCS to come out with their new tuition rates each year. And then we do that calculation and announce that in June as to, what those rates are. So that was easy to do. The requirement for the post-secondary institutions, we've already communicated that to them. That's already being done this year. So all of your partner institutions know how that is working already. So the two things that we're working on now, and these are really the bigger things for this whole project, is working on all of this alignment with the general education core and that change in mindset of actually removing work-ready dual credit and changing everything to the type of coursework that we're actually looking at. So with this next slide, we're going to talk about the opportunities we have. Robin, can you advance? Thanks. All right. So here's the opportunities we have for improvement. Because we do have a lot of growth, as I've mentioned before. And so right now, we are looking more at the quality of the program and having a better understanding of how dual credit is to work, how it's supposed to be planned and intentional for the courses to help with, the alignment on the post-secondary side, the transferability of the dual credit courses. We have students now who are taking a lot of dual credit and they're racking up a lot of credit hours. And, and I have conversations all the time with parents who think that, just if a student reaches 60 credit hours, they should be able to cash that in for an associate degree. And as you know, that's really not how dual credit works at all. For degree programs, there's very intentional coursework that students have to take. And so we end up having students who are taking a lot of courses that end up only counting as electives and not really counting toward their, degree requirements in any other ways. So we're trying to kind of shore that up and help whatever's happening with the students and the choices they're making be the most beneficial. So we're eliminating random acts of dual credit. We're talking about better ways to use dual credit. And we're also in the process of this going to provide professional development and hopefully improve all of the advising all the way around for the students. Now, I want to touch very quickly on what the current scholarship availability is. So as you may be aware, and I hope you are aware, because we've tried to make this known to everyone as much as possible, KRS, which is Kentucky Revised Statute 164-786, that is the statute for the dual credit scholarship program. And it allows students to take a total of 2 general education courses across the junior and senior years. The state biennial budget language, though, has expanded that over the last several years to allow those juniors and seniors to take 2 general education classes each year and receive scholarship dollars for them. So we want to be very clear that what's happening here with House Bill 193 will not impact that. House Bill 193 only does what those things were that I mentioned a few screens ago. It's not impacting the number of gen ed scholarships that students will have available that will be funded by the dual credit scholarship program. Now, let me also add right here that I know many of you are wondering about how many general education courses students will be eligible for next year. Unfortunately, I do not have a clear answer on that for you this morning. We are in the process of working on a new state biennial budget. The legislature is discussing that right now. Both the House and the Senate have their versions of the numbers. but nothing has been finalized. So as soon as that becomes final, Kia will send information out to your school's dual credit contacts so that everybody can be aware of what's going to happen and how that's going to work as far as student eligibility for next year. But I just know that's a question for everybody right now, and I wanted to make sure it was addressed. So if you have other questions along that line, please post them in the chat. The next slide. Now, this is what House Bill 193 will not change. So, as we mentioned before, it doesn't touch the number of courses that a student's eligible to receive. It also plays no role in changing the academic grade levels that are related. Juniors and seniors have the general ed available to them, and you have, freshmen through seniors who have the CTE scholarship availability. So that doesn't change at all. That's still the same. Also, it does not really impact the fact that students can receive dual discounted tuition rates for all the dual credit coursework that they want to take. And so, the existing options that are there for students to take additional coursework and pay out of pocket, or I know some of the school districts are supplementing what the students can have by covering those expenses, that still stays in place. So all the dual credit that a student takes is still going to be discounted. Nothing changes there. And then last but not least, this bill and these amendments will not change your ability to partner with post-secondary institutions and to work out arrangements, that for offering dual credit coursework that is the best possible coursework for your students, and to work that into your schedules. And so with this, I want to now transition over and talk a little bit more about what that approved coursework means. And I'm going to turn the presentation over to my colleague, Robin, and let her have this part of the presentation.
All right. Thanks so much, Becky. I did want to let everybody know that this presentation is being recorded, and I understand that there might be some connectivity issues, and we've checked it on our end. We don't think it's a technical problem on this side of the webinar, but if any of you are having trouble, just rest assured we will record the webinar and share it with everyone who has been in attendance today. A little bit more about exactly what House Bill 193 requires as far as the state's general education core goes. So as you can see here on this screen, House Bill 193 requires that gen ed courses funded by the dual credit scholarship program be aligned to the statewide general education core that is approved by the Kentucky Council on Post-Secondary Education. So what is this statewide general education core, and where can you learn more about it? Heather is going to place a link to the statewide transfer policy in the chat. You probably want to open it right now or in the resources link. But just to say, the statewide general education core is found inside Kentucky's transfer policy. Some of you might not be familiar with the general education core, so we're going to discuss it today in a little more detail. So Kentucky's General Education Core Framework identifies a collection of 30 or more unduplicated semester credit hours that are organized into 5 different categories. If any of you have earned college degrees in the past, you probably remember that Gen Ed core that you started with. So typically, students complete these courses at the beginning of their college journey because they build a broad base of general knowledge in different disciplines that will help a student be successful in college. So they sort of form the foundation upon which students will build their specialized study in their program or their degree. So the 5 categories in the Gen Ed core include written and oral communications, and this might include things like college composition or speech courses. It also includes arts and humanities, which might be things like art history, music, or literature courses. Quantitative reasoning courses, which are your mathematics and statistics courses. Natural sciences, and these include science courses that include things like hands-on projects. They use scientific principles, sometimes offered in lecture or lab or combination of both. And then the social and behavioral sciences, which include things like psychology and sometimes history. Now, each of the general education categories has a range of hours that an institution may require for their gen ed core. So these ranges are not randomly assigned. They are aligned to the requirements that are outlined by SAC-COC, which is our state's post-secondary accrediting body. So it's important for you to note that as institutions are building their own general education core requirements, they may choose as few as 6 hours in communications, for example, or as many as 9. So they have a range that they can work within. So each institution's general education core is not exactly alike, but they have a range of courses or credit hours that they can work within. And then each general education category has its own set of student learning objectives. And so this is how an institution will tag or designate which category a course aligns to. In some cases, it's obvious, such as college algebra is almost always quantitative reasoning, but it's not always obvious. And so they use these student learning objectives to really align and designate which category these courses fall into. Now, that said, it's really important that when students are selecting their earliest college courses, that they align to these categories and that students take courses in as many different categories as possible and that they avoid excess hours in any particular category. For example, if a student really loves history, they may want to take all of their dual credit courses in history. Now, generally, though not always, history courses fall into social and behavioral sciences. So if a student takes 4 or 5 dual credit courses in this category, they're going to end up with 12 or 15 hours, which would be considered excess hours in that category. And they might have few or no courses in other categories. So unfortunately, when this student then matriculates to college after high school, these dual credit courses may be assigned to electives, or they might not be assigned at all because they've exceeded the 6 or 9 hours that are required by their institution in that category. So it's really, really important for high school counselors and anyone who advises students about dual credit or post-secondary course selection to understand the particulars of the state's general education core. Because students may lose time or money or both if they don't choose wisely when it comes to early college credit that they earn. So Becky's going to talk a little bit about how we're going to try to help you tighten that up a bit related to House Bill 193.
Yeah, thanks, Robin. So with this, and now that we can see just how many credit hours are recommended in each of the general education core categories, as you know, that the scholarship is already limited to the number of general education classes a student can take. So 2 classes, most of our dual credit classes are 3 hours. So you can see when students have 2 classes, general education classes with a scholarship, they have pretty much maxed out where they fall into one category. If they're taking 2 English classes, they have the 6 hours for communications. Now, that may or may not be all of the communications coursework that they need for whatever college they attend after high school graduation. But for scholarship purposes, we're going to recommend that students take up to 2 classes in each category and no more than 2 classes in each category because we kind of want to limit that. Now, I will say that, when it talks about, when we get into some of the things like natural sciences, we talk about having laboratories that go along with those lectures. That still works the same way. So students may have an extra hour or 2 when you add the labs on. That's okay. The other thing to keep in mind with this is that with the CTE coursework, there are some of the classes approved on the CTE side that can also count as general ed classes. Anatomy and physiology is a good one. It may fit into, natural sciences, and it's also, part of a CTE pathway. So that'll be something to be aware as we move forward because students may be taking things and being paid by CTE scholarships, but it may also, count toward this gen ed core as far as not having too many hours in any one particular area. And so as we implement this, and we're going to talk about, the rollout of the implementation in a few slides, but Key is going to provide reports to help you track how many courses the scholarship program has paid for and where they fall into these different categories. Robin, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, thanks, Becky. Well, as we've already discussed, students need a broad general knowledge in various disciplines in order to be well prepared for the critical thinking and communication skills and general rigor of the coursework that will be in their major. And so the statewide general education core has a couple of purposes and guiding principles. For example, it emphasizes the common general education requirements that exist across our institutions. So that promotes the acceptability and transferability of these general education credits from one institution to another. And you know that's really important when it comes to dual credit courses. It also enhances cooperation among institutions with respect to advising. So you sort of know what's coming in the Gen Ed core, and so everybody across the state can advise students accordingly. There are also certain guiding principles. The Gen Ed core is predicated upon this acquisition of competencies in broad academic areas. It's not focused on the specific course requirements for particular majors, and a lot of our students, when they're in high school, don't know what they're going to major in, and that's okay when it comes to the Gen Ed requirements. And it also recognizes the importance of academic advising so that students really sort of understand this Gen Ed core as well. So the purposes here are really important in our discussion today because when students complete courses in general education categories, they should transfer to other public institutions in that same category. So it's really important for students planning of their post-secondary programs. So when they complete dual credit courses intentionally, they know what categories they should apply to. They'll be more likely to apply and or transfer into those general education requirements when they enter college after high school. So again, this saves them both time and money, and it allows them to keep a wide range of electives that are still available to them when they arrive on campus after high school. And you know, that's really important when you think about the best interest of students. We want them to be able to make those choices when they enter college full-time after high school. All right, Becky, back to you.
Okay. So let's talk about what the things are that would be the considerations you'd want to take in, the highest priority for those considerations. We are going to be limiting, when we do our Gen Ed approvals, we're limiting the coursework to 100 and 200 level courses. So we want these to be more introductory courses that the students are taking and that we're paying for. Now, that doesn't mean the students couldn't take other levels on their own and pay for it through out of pocket. This is just what the scholarship is covering, 100 and 200 level. Also, you want to look at the things that have, where you have the largest enrollment. Maybe it's where your scholarships have been applied before as far as your classrooms and how you're scheduling students. And the coursework that has the highest transferability, all of those things that Robin was talking about with the way that the transfer is supposed to work. And I believe we have the Gen Ed policies down in, post it to the chat so you all can have those links. But we're talking about alignment with the core, so to make those those highly transferable classes. And as the post-secondary institutions are working to identify the courses that will be on their approved Gen Ed course list, they're also looking at these same considerations. And we've provided data to them so they can see where the scholarships have been trending over the last few years. And so they can see the courses with the most enrollment and then try to fit, all of those things in. And then, of course, we want to take into consideration what the best interests of the students are, in the short term while they're in high school, but also what their long-term goals are, and then help make that fit best for them. So it's not an easy puzzle to solve, but we are going to do our best to try to get this thing aligned so we actually, can say that we're providing quality benefits to all of our students. Let's talk more about the implementation plan. We've divided this up into 3 phases, and I want to take you through this slide by slide. And if you have questions, just as a reminder, there's a Q&A link at the bottom of your screen. If you have questions, please post them there. And if we have time at the end that we can take some questions, we will try to do that. But regardless of whether we can do the live Q&A, we will answer those questions, and we'll make sure that we get those in the FAQ as well that we're going to talk about. So for spring, this is where we are right now, phase 1. And we've already started on this. As you can see, that first bullet is talking about communication with post-secondary partners and with you, the high school partners, regarding the changes that are coming with this bill. There was a webinar in February with the post-secondary institutions, And during that time, we kind of gave them a somewhat similar presentation to explain to them what we were doing with the general education coursework. And then we kicked it off by asking them to start identifying the courses that they wanted in their approved list. And so right now we have limited their choices to 10 in each of those categories. So if you think back to the 5 categories that Robin just described, the communication, the quantitative reasoning, the natural sciences, the arts and humanities, and the social and behavioral sciences, 10 courses in each of those categories is the maximum that we're looking at for the institution. So right now, your post-secondary partners are working on their list, and they're submitting those to KIA, and they're supposed to have those into KIA by March 31st. So we will have that, and then at that point, we are going to turn it around, and KIA and CPE are going to work together to review what those lists are and to make sure everything is works the way that we would like for it to work. And then we'll communicate back to the institutions as to, whether or not all of their courses are approved or if there needs to be further discussion about what those courses are. So that's a project that we're already underway, working on now to try to complete. Ideally, we will have that finished by May so that, the institutions can at least have their approved list for the 26-27 year. Now, for the 26-27 year, you may not notice a whole lot changing on your end. We are still going to operate the scholarship programs the same way that we have done it this past year. But the difference will be that the post-secondary institutions, when they actually submit the enrollment data to KIA to tell us which classes the students are in and which classes we need to pay for, they're going to try to align that submission as closely as possible to the courses that we'll have approved on their gen ed course list. So everything coming into KIA system for dual credit scholarship payment, DCS, which is already just gen ed, they're going to try to align that to the course list. However, we're not going to limit it to the course list. So if there are some stray courses here and there that the institutions need to report because students aren't enrolled in something in their course list, KIA is still going to allow that for the 26-27 year, and we're still going to pay for that. So in that way, the 26-27 year will work a lot the same way as the 25-26 year, because we're not going to put any limits up around what's submitted for gen ed. And then, of course, I don't want to leave CTE out. It will work the same way. And for the 26-27 year, we'll continue to call that work ready dual credit as we bring all those CTE classes in. So that stays the same. Now, what changes is when we move on to phase 2. All right. So when we get to the fall of 27, this is really where the changes are going to be implemented statewide, although planning for it will take place during the 26-27 year. So at the time we get to the fall of 27, we will have all the approved gen ed course lists approved and published and available on KIA's website under the dual credit scholarship section. And so you will know exactly what those are. Now, for 26-27, what we just talked about, with that being a flexible year, those institutions are trying to make their enrollment match up to their course list, but there is flexibility there for us to continue to work with the institutions to make tweaks and changes so that we can get to a good place for the 27-28 year. And so that's what we're working on with the course list, and that's kind of the flexibility and things we're trying to do across 26-27. But we're going to have a final course list for 27-28. And I'm going to skip down to the third bullet and, say at that point, the scholarship payment is going to be limited to only the courses that are on the approved gen ed list and only the courses that have been approved on the CTE side. And so the other courses, students can take those. They want to take something that's not on the approved list, but they're going to pay for those out of pocket because the scholarship won't cover them. So coming back up to that second bullet, though, what you can expect in 27-28 is updates to KIA's scholarship system. We are working on that now. We're also going to have some updates to reporting processes. We are looking at expanding access levels so that high school counselors can actually be more engaged with my KIA and being able to see student information. We're looking at ways that we will improve the application process. It makes set preferences easier for students. We're trying to work on ways that we can tell you which students were not able to load and you submit your data to us so you can know we can account for all of the students, whether they have links or not, trying to ease that because I know that creates a lot of frustration. We're also looking at, tracking how many students are, taking classes that are part of that Gen Ed core and giving you some information on that to help with the advising piece of it. And then, of course, and that will be a new report. And then we'll have some toolkits available and some other supports. And if you have ideas or things that you think you would need as far as support materials for students, for parents, for yourself, talking to students, or just to make sense of this, please, note that down in the Q&A or feel free to email me. And all suggestions are welcome at this point. For phase 3 of this is kind of the year after the big push. And with phase 3, it's more continuing on. At that point, we are going to have a process established with the institutions so that they have some guidance as to how they can adjust their Gen Ed list, their approved course list from one year to the next. And we're going to have that rolled out by that point. I'm actually hoping to have that done before we get to 28. And then, of course, additional supports. We're also looking at other types of things we can be doing as we move forward in the future, such as ways to get information out through emails, important tidbits, maybe it's newsletters, maybe we have short informational videos to kind of help on the professional development side for high schools, for the post-secondary staff, but maybe for students and parents as well. So everybody can understand that this is how dual credit is supposed to work and that it shouldn't just be randomly students asking to take classes because they have an interest in a particular class. So with that, let's talk about really what high schools, should do. And this is our recommendations for 2026. You may think of other things in addition to this, and that's perfectly fine. But learn more about the statewide general education core. CPE and my friend Robin, they are really the experts on what this general education core is. And I'm the first to admit that on the academic side, things can become kind of confusing to understand that. And so they really are the experts, and more information is going to be rolled out about that to help you understand what that's about and how that works. Also, go ahead and talk with your post-secondary partners about what they have on their approved Gen Ed list. Some of them are probably already reaching out to you to talk about that because they've known this was coming for a few weeks, and they're already starting to look at ways they can pull things into alignment on their side with what the coursework is for 26-27. So even though we're not locking down scholarships until fall of 27, we have that whole year in between us to kind of work out these differences. And so they're keeping that in mind, and we're all working toward that common goal. We want to think about ways to fine-tune the communications with the students and with the parents around this Gen Ed core and around how to make really good scholarship choices so that they can have the coursework that's going to be transferable and that they don't load up on too many of one thing in the same category, like those history courses that Robin talked about a minute ago. And then, of course, it's your internal discussions on your plans toward the 27-28 school year and what that means on the implementation side. So that is where it's going to impact your scheduling. I know all the high schools start very early on that, thinking about scheduling for the next year. And so this gives you a whole year to kind of get out ahead of that. Maybe not an entire year for everybody before you start that planning, but at least gives you a good amount of time to think about how that might look and what kind of changes are made to the courses that are being offered there at the high school. And work out those things with the post-secondary partners before we get to the fall of 27. All right, so we now want to talk a little bit about where we have some resources for you. Kia.com has a dual credit scholarship page. If you haven't been there, when you go to Kia.com, there's a toolbar in the middle that says grants and scholarships, and you can just go underneath that and it drops down a menu, and dual credit scholarship is listed toward the top of that menu. But I've grabbed a screenshot here because you'll see these other programs come up first and then dual credit. But where that red circle exists, that's where we are listing the general ed course information resources on kia.com. So you can click on there, you can go there today. You'll see what we currently have for the frequently asked questions. There's also a link to the recording of the webinar that we did last month for the post-secondary institutions. As soon as we have today's recording link, we will go ahead and try to get that up to the website so that if you want to go back and watch this recording, you can. And then as there's updates, other updates on the implementation as we move forward, we will post that out there. Eventually, when we start to have published gen ed course lists for the institutions, we will put those out on this site as well. And so with that, Robin, I'm going to turn it back over to you to talk a little bit about other resources that are available.
All right. Thank you, Becky. So in addition to the support and the structure that Becky has described, the Council on Post-Secondary Education will also continue to provide support, particularly related to alignment to the General Education Core. So first of all, there are many resources that are housed on Futurity. And Futurity is a comprehensive career and education exploration platform that's maintained by CPE. If you haven't visited Futurity, you really should. It has a lot of great information that has to do with college going, but I want to talk today about how it is a one-stop shop where students and other people can research their career paths and educational requirements and even financial aid opportunities that are specific to Kentucky. And so it will link you to helpful websites where you can even find out more information. But one especially helpful resource within Futurity is the page for transferring college credit. And that's especially important for dual credit students and dual credits that are earned while students are still in high school. So from this page, you can access the TESS or transfer equivalency system for every public college or university in Kentucky. Now, within the TESS application, you're able to search for any course that's offered and see how the university has tagged that course. That means it will tell you if the course has been designated by that institution as written communications, as quantitative reasoning, or arts and humanities, etc. So as you consider the agreements and the professional interactions that you have with different post-secondary providers of dual credit, you want to make sure that you know how these courses are tagged. So you can use the TESS system. You can just have conversations with these post-secondary providers to ask them how these general education courses that you offer are tagged or which general education category they fall into. And you want to be sure that as you build your school schedule, that you provide your students with a range of options that will help them intentionally meet their gen ed requirements and avoid those random acts of dual credit that may or may not serve their future plans well. The test system will also give you the opportunity to check to see how a course, let's say a course earned at Eastern Kentucky University, would transfer to Western Kentucky University, for example. So you can see the name of the course when it was at EKU and what the name of the course will be when it transfers to Western. So there's a lot of information within the test system. And so within Futurity, there are links to every public institution's test application so that you can find out that information. Now, I know that you've been given a lot of information today, and it might be your first opportunity to learn about the Gen Ed Core or any of the other topics that we've discussed. So here at CPE, and of course our colleagues at KIA, we're really committed to making sure you have resources and supports to implement House Bill 193 well and to make sure that your dual credit programs are serving students well. So please be watching for more professional development opportunities and resources as we move through the implementation phases for House Bill 193. All right, so Becky, back to you to wrap things up.
Okay, so we wanted to leave you with some contact information and to kind of give you some category type things to break this up for you. So if you have questions about the dual credit scholarship program, and it really is kind of an A to Z, you can contact me. And my contact information is sitting there at the top of the screen. Now, I will add that if it's about current year processes and changing semesters or things like that, please continue to send that on to Cindy. She's working all of those things for the daily changes. But if it's questions about what's going on with this House Bill 193 or larger policy things, then please feel free to contact me. If you have questions about the Gen Ed core, how that works, how the transfer policy works, advising pieces of this, then Robin is the best person to go to for that. And we've put her contact information down there for you. And we're going to leave this screen up for a minute. And with this, we're going to bring on stage Amanda Ellis, who's a senior vice president at the Council on Post-Secondary Education. And Amanda has been watching our Q&A for us through the presentation and kind of screening those. And I think we're going to have time for maybe 10 minutes to take a few questions and answers. And so, Amanda, what do you have that we need to answer?
Yeah, thank you, Becky and Robin, both. I know there, again, it's been a lot of information. So we're going to touch on a couple of questions that were asked multiple times that I think will be helpful for you. But of course, these will be placed in the FAQ and you can watch this webinar watch the recording. So Becky and Robin, one of the questions says you stated that the students can take as many dual credit courses that they want at a discounted rate, like they do now, right? Will the colleges limit the number of dual credit courses a student can take?
So that has always been up to the discretion of the colleges. So far, they haven't moved to do that. I'm not sure that this will change that for them. But that is really their decision as to whether or not they want to put any limits around how many courses they will allow to be offered as dual credit for that discounted rate.
Great. There's lots of questions, I think, just to wrap their minds around as they've just, many folks on this call have just completed scheduling for next year. So we had lots of questions. This is kind of a twofold question. Will the list be unique to post-secondary institutions? I'll start that first. So the list, the ones that you were talking about before for approved courses, will it be by post-secondary institution?
So the answer there is yes. Each institution is forming their own list, and there will be some variations between the various institutions.
Great. Because, and a reminder to that too, is that we do not have common course numbering, course code numbering. And so if you only work with one institution, you may not be aware of that. And so that's why there'll be multiple. And then this kind of is the caveat to this that we've gotten several questions is, will this list for 27-28 be available prior to high school scheduling in January and February of 2027?
It should be. Let me put it that way. I don't want to make a hard promise on that, but we are trying our very best to work things out as quickly as possible because we do realize that you need to make scheduling decisions for 27-28 and that happens very early. So we're going to do our best to try to have that as locked down as we can and as solid as we can before we get to next January. We can do that.
Okay. And there were several questions on just reiterating about the impact of this on CTE pathway dual credit. Is this impacting CTE dual credit?
It's not impacting a student's ability to take CTE classes that are part of the pathway. The thing that it may impact and that everybody needs to be aware of is that some of the CTE classes might also be able to be counted as gen ed classes, even though the scholarship will not pay for them as gen eds. So when it comes to a matter of how many classes students are taking and all the credit hours they're racking up, that's what we need to be aware of. But we're not going to penalize anything on the CTE side or say, no, we can't pay for this because we've already done it, on the gen ed side. But for everybody to be mindful of that some of these courses will fit into both categories, depending on whether or not they're taken as gen ed or they're taken as CTE. But once they get to college, keep in mind, CTE is not a thing when you get to college. After high school graduation, the whole CTE conversation kind of changes. And at that point, it's about the credits that a student has earned on their transcript and how those are going to be applied toward their degree or credential requirements. And so at that point, those courses that were fitting into both categories in kind of a gray area on the dual credit side, they're now on the college transcript, and they may only end up electives if too many are taken, in the same category. So that's really where we want to watch how this plays in with CTE.
Absolutely. And I'll finalize this last question so we can wrap this up and be mindful of everybody's time, is that there's a lot of interest also in the test system. So Robin, I'm going to defer this one to you first, and then Becky, there's a request for Kia. Is there a login for tests? How do we access it if they don't go through Futurity? How else can they find tests? And that is TES for Transfer Equivalency System. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah, that is correct. So let me just start by saying that many of the post-secondary institutions have their general education core also posted on their website. So if you work with just one or a few post-secondary providers, you can probably go and find their general education core, that you can just copy and paste so that and it will show you which category the courses fall into. But the test system gives you access to every post-secondary institution. Now, I do want to say that the transfer equivalency system, its purpose is to help you see how a course will transfer from one institution to another. But in the process of doing that, it also tells you what category it's been tagged in. And so there is not a specific, you don't have to create an account to use tests. If you follow those links, let's say that you partner with Eastern Kentucky University, you would go to Eastern Kentucky University's test system, and then you can just identify a college. It doesn't really, if you're not looking to see how a course specifically transfers to another college, you can just pick one. And then once you pick one, you type in the course code. So let's say it's English 101, it might be E&G 101. You type that in, and then you'll be able to click on that course, and it tells you a lot of information about that specific course, including how the institution has tagged it. So if you have a specific question about a course, you can find it out inside that transfer equivalency system, but it's institution by institution. So if you're looking for one related to Eastern or Western or UK or U of L, you just would go there and then search for that particular course.
And all
The
KCTC.
purpose of it
Yes.
is not to show you how it's tagged, but it does show you how it's tagged.
Yes. And all KCTCS campuses are listed, not just the system, but each campus.
Yes.
And then the last question, Becky, is was requested, can we put the test links on Kia's website as well?
Sure. I'll work with council on getting that information so we can do that.
Awesome. So I know that wraps up our time today, so I'll turn it back to you all. But we did end up with about just shy of 30 questions, but a lot of them are repetitive. So we will follow up in that FAQ and really appreciate the suggestions and questions for clarity. So I'll turn it back to you, ladies.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody, once again for joining us today. And again, we look forward to working with you as we over these next few years as we get this alignment put in place, and hopefully this makes dual credit a better situation for our students all the way around, and helps kind of ensure that our state dollars are being spent so that we continue to have support, the financial support we need for the program. And as I mentioned before, as soon as Kia has some answers for you regarding what next year's eligibility looks like, we will be communicating that via email to your dual credit contacts across the districts.
All right. Thanks for joining, everybody.
Bye, everyone.